Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. A new class action lawsuit is being launched against the Alberta government on behalf of business owners. Ministers are meeting with police in Ottawa to discuss the large increase in vehicle theft in Canada and what can be done to prevent this crime. And we take you deep into the tunnels dug by Hamas in Gaza, the same tunnels which housed a number of hostages that were taken on October the 7th.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. A class action lawsuit is being launched against the Alberta government on behalf of business owners here in the province, those who faced operational restrictions due to public health orders during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, to chat about this in more detail is Jeffrey Rath, lead counsel, and a man who is spearheading the lawsuit. He joins us now from Foothills, Alberta. Now, you say this lawsuit follows the recent Ingram decision by the courts, which declared that all of Dr. Deena Hinshaw's public health orders were deemed illegal?
We started acting for Rebecca Ingram in the fall of 2020 when Deena Hinshaw started promulgating all of these ridiculous public health orders that had the effect of enacting one of the biggest expropriations and seizures of private property in the history of Alberta, specifically telling business owners that at a whim by Deena Hinshaw, they were going to be shut down and that they were going to have to use all of their family savings, borrow money from banks, do whatever they could to keep their businesses from going bankrupt, because Deena Hinshaw had declared that healthy people could no longer go to their establishments could no longer patronize their establishments unless they gave in to the ridiculous vaccine requirements that were imposed on people in the province. So what we have in the Ingram decision is a ruling from the Alberta Court of King's Bench saying that every order in effect that was issued by Deena Hinshaw that was before the court in that case were found to be ultra vires the Public Health Act, or in other words, patently illegal or completely illegal. So if you think about that, think of all the business losses in this province. People, in Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Calgary, Edmonton, Mirror, Alberta, that almost lost their businesses or did lose their businesses and ended up going bankrupt because Deena Hinshaw interpreted her powers under the Public Health Act of giving her the unfettered ability to destroy people's business equity at a whim.
And this class action lawsuit represents all impacted Alberta business owners?
Yeah, that's right. The way class action law works in Alberta is everybody who would be entitled to join the class or be part of the class is deemed to be in the lawsuit unless they directly contact our office and declare that they want to be out of the lawsuit. So as of now, we have the honor of representing every Albertan and Alberta business that lost money as a result of being shut down by the Deena Hinshaw COVID orders, which we all know now were completely illegal.
Now, the court has to actually grant permission for this action to proceed as a class action. Why don't you explain how that works?
It's called a certification hearing. So as of now, Alberta government lawyers are fighting certification. We don't know whether Premier Smith even understands that that's what's going on, and whether this is just a knee-jerk reaction from from Alberta government lawyers that, oh, okay, we've been served with a lawsuit, fight, fight, fight. But I think there's a question of some nicety as to whether or not Danielle Smith wants to look all of the people that elected her in the eye and tell them that she does not stand for property rights in this province, and she thinks that people that lost their property and had their businesses destroyed by illegal COVID orders should suck it up and not look to the Alberta government for any relief with regard to actions taken by the Alberta government that were clearly illegal prior to Danielle Smith being elected premier.
Thanks so much, Jeffrey. That was lawyer Jeffrey Rath joining us today from Foothills, Alberta. Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is in Vancouver proposing a new plan for First Nations to collect taxes from industry, which he says would speed up project approvals. Poilievre announced what he calls an optional First Nations resource charge, dubbing it a First Nation-led solution to a made-in-Ottawa problem. He says the plan would permit First Nations to collect 50% of the federal taxes paid by industrial activities on their land, with industry getting a tax credit in exchange.
Putting First Nations back in control of their money and letting them bring home the benefits of resource development will get faster buy-in for good projects to go ahead. In other words, more earnings for grassroots First Nations communities, not Ottawa gatekeepers. Those earnings will mean paychecks, schools, clean water, hospitals, and other wonderful opportunities. Only common sense Conservatives will fight for real economic reconciliation by supporting First Nations taking back control of their money and their lives.
Federal Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc and other ministers discussed crime in our country during a summit on auto theft. The Trudeau government says more needs to be done to address the increase in vehicles being stolen in many parts of Canada. RCMP Commissioner Mike Dehem says there needs to be more tools made available to vehicle owners. He also says we need to be more vigilant.
And there's a question I was asked about a cell telephone right now. You can lock it from a distance. Why can't we do that with a vehicle that's stolen and have that and have that possibility, the capability? I guess my message to Canadians is just be vigilant. You're looking at the tactics. There's some really good reporting being done out there how the vehicles are being stolen. I just be vigilant. Make sure you take the right precautions with different tools. You've heard today with the insurance company that said there's tracker device that you can buy and insert and install in your vehicle. So I think you should seriously be considering that. But it's being vigilant.
You know, even though winter's upon us, emergency officials have still been battling a number of wildfires here in Alberta. According to Alberta Wildfire, there are currently 57 active wildfires here in the province. Most are in the northern region, and fortunately, all of them are under control. There are 9 still burning in the Fort McMurray Forest area, 8 in the Slave Lake and High Level regions, and 7 in the Grand Prairie District. Fire officials say there are also still fire advisories in place right here in southern Alberta, including those in Pincher Creek, Fort Macleod, and in Taber. Well, no smoke here in southwestern Alberta, but we had a little bit of fog. Jeanette Rocher is now with a quick peek at the forecast. Jeanette, the fog advisory for Lethbridge continued, and we may even see a few flurries as well?
Yeah, we saw those fog patches clear up this afternoon, and as you said, we could see a few flurries developing this evening and lasting overnight, as much as 2 centimeters of snow overnight, as a matter of fact. And then as we get into Friday, we could see another 2 centimeters of snow, and by the afternoon, that snow should clear up, giving us a high of -7, and that should be it for the flurries. At least over the weekend, we should be seeing some clear skies ahead of us, and I'll be back later in the show to give you all those details.
Great, thanks so much, Jeanette. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected Hamas's demands for a ceasefire and has vowed to press on with Israel's military offensive in Gaza until achieving absolute victory.
היום אמרתי למזכיר המדינה בלינקן שלאחר שנמוטט את החמאס, אנחנו נבטיח שעזה תהיה מפורזת לתמיד. ההיסטוריה כבר הוכיחה שיש רק כוח אחד שיכול להבטיח פירוז כזה. מדינת ישראל, באמצעות צה"ל וכוחות הביטחון שלנו. המשמעות היא שישראל תהיה ותפעל בעזה בכל מקום ובכל זמן שידרש, כדי להבטיח שהטרור לא ירים שוב את ראשו. אנחנו בדרך לניצחון מוחלט. הניצחון הוא בהישג יד. זה לא עניין של שנים או עשרות שנים, זה עניין של חודשים.
The report surfacing that tunnels dug by Hamas in the Gaza region and beyond were hundreds of kilometers long and were 18 years in the making. CBN Middle East correspondent Chris Mitchell went into the tunnels to see where the Hamas leader set up and where hostages were taken to following the October 7th attacks.
We're in what the general calls a strategic tunnel, not a tactical tunnel where fighters can go from place to place, but a tunnel used by Hamas leaders, and also a place where they know that at least 3 of the hostages were kept.
Our next stop revealed a much different room, furnished and equipped for both guards and Hamas leaders.
This is years of planning. So if anybody has a question, how long do I think the 7th of October was planned? For many years. They planned how to attack women and children in the villages.
This area was likely the compound for many of the Hamas senior leaders, but after the war began, they built this cage, and they believe that at least 12 hostages were held here, 3 of whom have been released.
If anybody in the world needs evidence for the horrific actions that the terror entity Hamas has done, you're in it. You're in this evidence. From this place over here, at least 3 hostages were released.
They included Sapir Cohen, Saha Calderon, and Or Yaakov. The tunnel holding these hostages goes on for more than half a mile.
As you can see in this tunnel,
So many places it goes off to another direction. So you can see that this would be like a spider's web all the way through Khan Yunis and many other places of the Gaza Strip.
Given the size and setup, General Goldfuss believes Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar stayed in this tunnel and vows to track him down.
Wow. Colombians have been joining Ukraine's army as it seeks to attract Spanish-speaking soldiers to help replenish its ranks. The war between Ukraine and Russia is nearing its 2-year anniversary.
Estábamos en el frente, estábamos luchando en el frente, teníamos compañeros heridos, estábamos haciendo la evacuación de los compañeros heridos y desafortunadamente cayó un dron kamikaze a mi lado y una granada explotó y recibí un fragmento de la granada en la cara, en la parte izquierda de mi pómulo y tuve contusión, entonces por lo cual estoy aquí.
The U.S. Supreme Court is weighing arguments over whether former U.S. President Donald Trump is disqualified from reclaiming the White House because of his alleged efforts to undo his loss in the 2020 federal election, ending with an attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th of 2021.
The Colorado Supreme Court held that President Donald J. Trump is constitutionally disqualified from serving as president under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. The Colorado Supreme Court's decision is wrong and should be reversed for numerous independent reasons. The first reason is that President Trump is not covered by Section 3 because the president is not an officer of the United States, as that term is used throughout the Constitution.
What if somebody came into a state Secretary of State's office and said, I took the oath specified in Section 3, I participated in an insurrection, and I want to be on the ballot. Does the Secretary of State have the authority in that situation to say, no, you're disqualified?
No, the Secretary of State could not do that consistent with term limits.
Now, a number of demonstrators gathered outside of the U.S. Supreme Court on Thursday, saying that Donald Trump should not be eligible to run as president again and should be kept off of the ballot.
But I do think it's a very historic moment because what we're looking at is really an interpretation of the Constitution and about whether or not if you have if you've sworn to abide by the Constitution and protect it, and then you lead an insurrection, you forego your right to continue to hold a public office. I think the Constitution is clear about that. If the presidency, if the office of the presidency is no longer accountable to the Constitution, then what future do we have in this country?
Breaking an addiction can be one of the most difficult obstacles a person can come up against in their life, but they don't have to do it alone. Patty Baidevat is a ministry leader for Celebrate Recovery here in southern Alberta. She says they offer support to overcome the addictions that many people are battling.
It is for a wide variety of hurts, hang-ups, or habits. Some people have issues with codependency, or maybe there might be other addictions like shopping addiction or food addiction, or just simply been hurt and are struggling with maybe some anxiety or depression and just need some support from a loving group of people that love God and love each other and just want to help one another.
Hear much more about Celebrate Recovery with Patty Baidevat and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up in the second half of our program. Well, this Sunday is 211 Day, and the United Way in Lethbridge is raising awareness about the service. As BCN's Alex McLeod explains now, with increasing calls, it is needed now more than ever.
February 11th is 211 Day. 211 is a 24-hour, 7 days a week service that helps connect people with local resources. Jackie Salzak, Executive Director of United Way Lethbridge, says the confidential service can connect you to hundreds of helpful programs.
So if you're looking for information about housing supports that are out there, daycares that may be out there, or subsidy information. If you are just looking for information about healthcare information that may be out there and you're not sure where to go. If you're looking for information, if you've been evicted from your home, information about what kind of supports may be out there for that. Mental health supports, all different kinds of things that are non-emergency type of supports.
Officials say housing and mental health related calls have been increasing year over year across Canada. More than 43,000 calls related to housing were made between January and June 2023. That's an increase of 22% from the previous 6-month period. Around 8,000 of those calls were made in Alberta. Mental health calls are also on the rise, with 44,000 needs identified for those in Canada. As for Alberta, 11,000 of those calls were made, with 155 of those coming from Lethbridge. For Bridge City News, I'm Alex McLeod.
This is Black History Month. Now, did you know that there was a Canadian baseball team in the 1930s called the Chatham Colored All-Stars? This team broke down a lot of racial barriers in the sport early on. Miriam Wright wrote a book on the team called Sporting Justice. She says the squad faced a lot of adversity in the beginning, including having stones thrown at them.
Just day-to-day racism they faced when they were playing. They experienced, people throwing rocks at them, hurling racial slurs at them. They would, when they traveled, it was difficult because they didn't know if they would be able to find a place to eat, whether a restaurant would serve them. They got turned away from hotels, even during their final championship tournament with the Penetanguishene team. And so this was a big barrier. Other barriers included like finances, money. They didn't have any major sponsors, and they had to scrounge to get people to, help them even buy their uniforms.
Make sure you catch the full interview with author and associate professor of history at the University of Windsor, Miriam Wright, and myself coming up later in our broadcast. Well, there was a little bit of a mist hovering over Lethbridge earlier today. Fortunately, a lot of it cleared, but it appears as though some light flurries and clouds are on the way. A full look at the weather picture is on deck. Environment Canada issued another fog advisory for our region today. Fortunately, a lot of the fog is dissipated, which is nice. But we may even see some flurries later here in southwestern Alberta. Jeanette Roche is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, we may begin to start seeing a little more sunshine, however, by the weekend.
Yeah, that's right. We just have to get through this fog and snowfall that we're seeing this evening and then into Friday as well. -7 for a high on Friday. After that, the clouds are going to clear and things are going to look a lot warmer. We're going to see that mercury rise to -2 on a Saturday with sunshine on Sunday. And then look at that. We're getting up into the pluses there. 3 degrees for a high on Monday, looking at chance of showers. And then we're going to see some flurry action again on a Tuesday with a high of -2. And then back down to -5 on a Wednesday with a mix of sun and cloud. But even though we're going as low as -5 and -7, according to the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 1, average low is -12. So we are still sticking in that seasonal range, and at times even going a little bit above that. So 17 was our high temperature on this day back in 1954. -37 was the record low on this day, and that was back in 1994. Sun rose this morning at 7:54. Sun set this evening at 5:38, looking at 9 hours, 44 minutes of daylight, 2 minutes longer than we saw yesterday. Okay, Victoria and Vancouver, looking at a pair of 7s there for tomorrow. Also a mix of sun and cloud in both of those cities. Partly cloudy skies as well in Edmonton tomorrow. -4 for a high. -5 expected to be the high in Calgary tomorrow. Looking at a 30% chance of flurries and 20 to 40 winds there in Calgary. As we look to the rest of the prairies, we are seeing snow. So we're seeing a 60% chance of flurries in both Saskatoon and Regina. A pair of -5s for those two regions as well. -8 for the expected high in Winnipeg tomorrow, looking at periods of snow, and then 30 to 50 winds though. So a little bit more gusty winds in Winnipeg tomorrow. 12 degrees is the expected high tomorrow in Toronto, looking at drizzle in the morning and then 60% chance of showers by the afternoon. Ottawa seeing mainly cloudy skies, 7 for a high there, 5 for a high in Montreal. Could see some showers early in the morning and possibly clearing later on in the day. As we get to Atlantic Canada, Fredericton seeing a high of 0, clear skies, lots of sunshine as well expected in Halifax and Charlottetown tomorrow. 1 degree for both of those cities and a high of 0. In St. John's, looking at freezing drizzle and some flurries there. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Journalists and other workers at Bell Media are among those being laid off as BCE slashes 9% of its workforce, selling dozens of radio stations and cutting programming. The changes amount to 4,800 jobs across the telecom giant and marks the second major layoff at the media and telecommunications giant since last spring. BCE's media division is also selling off 45 of its 103 regional radio stations in British Columbia, Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada. Meanwhile, BCE is reporting a net income attributable to common shareholders of $382 million in its fourth quarter. That's down from a profit of $528 million. Movie chain Cineplex reported a $9 million loss in its latest quarter, even though revenue edged higher. The fourth quarter result compared with a profit of $10.2 million a year earlier. Revenue for the quarter totaled just over $315 million. That is up from almost $310 million in the last 3 months of 2022. Theater attendance rose from 9.2 to 9.6 million people over the past year. Cineplex also announced a refinancing plan which it says will improve its financial flexibility and reduce the dilutive impact of its convertible debentures. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 49 points on the day to finish at 20,919. The Dow was up 48 points to 38,726. The S&P 500 was up 2 on the day to 49.97, and the Nasdaq was up 37 points to 15,793. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 236 to 76.22 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was down 5 cents to $1.92 U.S. Gold was down 84 cents on the day to $2,034.52 U.S. an ounce, and silver was up 36 cents to $22.58 U.S. an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.63 per bushel, barley's at $6.23, canola's at $13.49, and corn is at $7.52 per bushel. Live cattle were up $1.55 to $183.78. Feeder cattle March contract was up $1.30 to $246.85, and lean hogs were down 8 cents to $73.30. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 74.30 U.S. Recapping one of our top stories, a class action lawsuit is being launched against the Alberta government on behalf of business owners here in the province. Those who faced operational restrictions or were forced to close their doors due to public health orders during the COVID-19 pandemic. The lawsuit follows the recent Ingram decision by the courts, which declared that all of Dr. Dina Hinshaw's public health orders were deemed illegal. The lawsuit is being spearheaded by Foothills, Alberta lawyer Jeffrey Rath. You know, there was a famous Canadian baseball team in the 1930s that faced a lot of racism and discrimination. Coming up, we're going to chat with Canadian historian Miriam Wright and learn more about the Chatham-colored All-Stars, and just in time for Black History Month, too. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of our local stories, visit our website, bridgecitynews.ca.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. On Saturday, February 24th, Streets Alive Mission is hosting their Coldest Night of the Year fundraiser. Last year, the city came together and raised over $66,000 in support of the life-changing work of Streets Alive Mission. This family-friendly walk is to raise money to help those who are experiencing hurt, hunger, and homelessness. To register, donate, and to find out more information, visit cnoy.org/Lethbridge. Discover more about the Blackfoot culture as they celebrate their annual International Peace Powwow and Festival taking place February 24th and 25th at the NMAC Center in Lethbridge, with doors opening at 10 a.m. Experience the spectacular grand entry, Indigenous music and dance. Plus, discover unique items at the craft fair and enjoy some fry bread at the concession. Tickets available now at the NMAC Center. And that's today's Bridge City News community calendar.
While many know about Jackie Robinson's experiences breaking Major League Baseball's color barrier back in 1947, few are familiar with the Chatham-colored All-Stars, a black Canadian team from the 1930s which broke racial barriers in baseball even earlier. Joining us today to talk more about it is author of Sporting Justice and Associate Professor of History at the University of Windsor in Ontario, Miriam Wright. Miriam, welcome to Bridge City News.
No, thank you very much.
Now, what inspired you to research and write about the Chatham-colored All-Stars?
Well, it actually began by accident. I was department head at the time. This was about 2015, And we had decided to give out awards recognizing community history groups to sort of recognize the work that people on the ground were doing to promote history. And one of the groups that we gave an award to were in Chatham, Ontario. So we went down the road to Chatham to present this award. And while I was there, I spoke a little bit about the way that the way that websites have really sort of opened up the way that we can connect with the public. And a woman afterwards came up to me and said that her late father-in-law was named Wilfred Boomer Harding, was a member of this Black team, the Chatham Colored All-Stars, and she wondered if we could help make a website. And she said that they had these family scrapbooks just full of articles and photos and documents about this team and about sort of the athletic career of her late father-in-law. And she said it was stories were going to disappear. The public memory of this team was fading, and the number of people who were alive who could still remember them were would soon pass away. And so I said, sure. And so I connected with my colleagues at the University of Windsor Library, Heidi Jacobs and Dave Johnson, and we decided to help make a website. So it began really as a public history project. We connected with the Chatham Sports Hall of Fame and the Chatham Kent Black Historical Society, and we made a website. We digitized the scrapbooks. And most importantly, we did oral histories. This was really important because we wanted to interview the family members of the players and get their perspectives on this story. And so, so we interviewed, we hired students, and so we launched this website finally 2017. And so it really kind of exploded. We didn't really sort of expect the response to be so big, and it's really taken on a life of its own in a lot of ways. The team got inducted into the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame in 2022. And so it's really been kind of exciting. And so writing the book was really, exploring the story a little bit more deeply, to sort of, we sort of began with the 1934 season. 1934 was so important because that was the year that they won a provincial championship, because sports was still largely segregated at that time by race, and Black teams had only recently been accepted into the white amateur baseball leagues. And the Chatham Colored All-Stars had formed in 1933, got accepted into the league. 1934, they won the provincial championship. And so the website really tells that story, but it's such a rich story, so much more involved with it. So I wrote a book. So it really sort of built upon that project.
So Miriam, can you share more details about the vibrant Black baseball network in southwestern Ontario and Michigan way back in the 1920s?
Oh, absolutely. This was done through family connections because the Black population in southern Ontario was very sort of cross-border. Many of them had family and relatives living on the other side, and so just started happening in the 1920s. There was a Black exhibition team in Chatham because they couldn't. They weren't playing any leagues, and so they would invite friends over. They invite teams that they knew, church league teams, and they bring them over to Chatham, and they would have these big sort of tournaments in Chatham, invite the wider population, and really kind of generated a big interest in Black baseball, even before the Chatham Colored All-Stars were formed.
So what unique challenges did the Chatham Colored All-Stars face in the primarily white world of organized amateur baseball? I suppose there was a lot of racism back then.
Absolutely. Just day-to-day racism they faced when they were playing. They experienced, people throwing rocks at them, hurling racial slurs at them. They would, when they traveled, it was difficult because they didn't know if they would be able to find a place to eat, whether a restaurant would serve them. They got turned away from hotels, even during their final championship tournament with the with the Penetanguishene team. And yeah, so this was a big barrier. Other barriers included like finances, money. They didn't have any major sponsors, and they had to scrounge to get people to help them even buy their uniforms. So they faced a lot of barriers that a white team wouldn't have faced.
And they overcame a lot of those barriers to win a provincial championship way back in 1934. Let's talk a bit about that with the Chatham Colored All-Stars.
Yeah, well, again, I think they surprised a lot of baseball observers. They were a team that were in many ways inexperienced. They were quite young. They, hadn't had to deal with all the bureaucracy and the politics of organized baseball, and they're getting a little bit of help from sponsors in Chatham who kind of knew the game and were connected and sort of helped shepherd them through. But yeah, they had to go through four tournaments. They played, Sarnia, Welland, Milton, and finally Penetanguishene. So it was a long series, and it was cold. I mean, by the time they finished, it was October and it was snowing. So it was it was kind of a long slog. Yeah.
So let me ask you something. Why did the team disband after only 8 years?
Well, I think partly they were aging out. They were by this point they were getting into their late 20s. A lot of them were married. Some of them had children, family responsibilities. The other thing was the war. It was 1940. Some of them joined up with Canadian Armed Services. Others were employed in industry that required during the war. Industry needed workers, and so a lot of them were just tied up with their jobs, not able to leave the way that they had been when they were, less fully employed, let's say.
Did any of those players get drafted into Major League Baseball?
No, although one of the players who was actually not black, who was actually indigenous. He actually received a tryout with the Detroit Tigers in 1937. His name was Willie Shognosh. He was from Walpole Island. He was Ojibwe, and because the black team used to play a lot of the local indigenous teams a fair bit, and so that's how they got to know him. So they invited him onto the team in 1935, and he was a pitcher. In fact, he was considered one of the best pitchers in Southern Ontario, and so he played with the All Stars for a number of years. 1937, he did get a tryout. We don't know what the result is. He remained playing in Southern Ontario, so obviously he didn't get drafted. But the fact that he was invited, suggests how good he was. Now, of course, the other team members wouldn't have had a chance, right? Because they were black, the barriers were still there. There was no opportunity for them. But the one Indigenous man who was on the team did.
Was he a southpaw?
No, I believe he was a right-hander.
He was a righty. Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Was he a closer or a starter? Do you remember?
A starter. No, there were two. The other sort of major pitcher for the All Stars was Earl Flat Chase. And he was a real legend because he was also the home run king. Like he was just
Wow.
a massive, massive player, and so he did both really well. And pitching and as a batter, but he often had a sore arm. So he had. I'm not sure when he had acquired it, but off and on. So he pitched whenever he could, but by 35. Willie Shognosh was doing a lot of the pitching.
And I bet you back then they didn't have a lot of pitch counts for their pitchers either. 75, 80, 100 pitches, that's too much. We got to take them out of the game. Back then,
Yeah.
they would start and try and finish the game. 150,
Oh,
200 pitches, we're good to go.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Now this team also had a good number of pitchers. They actually had four or five because people weren't as specialized. With baseball back then. They weren't as specialized. They were a lot more versatile. They would play, wherever they needed somebody, they would sort of fill in. And so there were actually four or five pitchers on that team. So that's another one of the strengths of the team is that they were because I think the game was or the series in 34 was ultimately won by pitching. And it's because they had this large group that were able to sort of pitch in when things are rough.
So, Miriam, can you talk more about the new black teams that emerged in the 1940s and 50s?
Yes, yeah, and that's the good thing about this team is that they really played a role in supporting young Black players because once they sort of established themselves, they were accepted. Like in the 40s, when the team broke up, many of them went on to white teams, but the younger generation was having a harder time, and so they had started by creating this like a junior team, in the late 30s, and then after the war was over, when they sort of came back and they regrouped, former members of the team formed a new Black team called the Taylor Athletic Club and brought in this whole slew of new players. Some of them, again, were quite good. In fact, one of them, A.B. Scott, played intercounty baseball in Brantford in the late 40s. And yeah, so that was sort of the beginning of it, and then it continued on into the 1950s. There's a team called the Chatham Panthers, and some of the Chatham Colored All-Stars players were coaching, and a couple of the sons of the original Chatham Colored All-Stars were playing on that team. So it was really it's really an intergenerational story. The teams from the team from the 20s is called the Giants. The Giants sort of ushered in the All-Stars, the All-Stars ushered in the Taylor AC and the Panthers. So it was it's a real intergenerational story that I think is really tells us a lot about the heart of the baseball culture in Chatham.
Is there any history, Miriam, of potentially Western Canadian ball players, whether Indigenous or Black, making their way to central Canada to also participate?
No, as you know, there is a strong tradition of Black baseball on the prairies, but I'm not aware of any connections with Southern Ontario. The only teams that they would play from away were, well, basically Southern Ontario. So London, Buxton, Chatham, Windsor, sort of that, and Detroit. That's sort of the network that they played in. I'm not aware of them playing with anyone outside of that.
So how does the history of the Chatham Colored All-Stars reflect larger themes in Canadian Black history?
Well, I think one of the most important things that it represents is the way that Black people were advocating for themselves. They were kind of resisting sort of the racist order of things, fighting for greater social and economic rights, because the Gen Code All-Stars were doing things that were mirrored in the community. There were other people in the community who were advocating for rights for Black people. It wasn't just them. It's part of this larger sort of fabric of activism. We often don't hear about very many of these stories. We might know about Viola Desmond, for example, but there were Viola Desmonds all over the place. And the Chatham Colored All-Stars sort of reflects the way that ordinary Black people, simply by standing up and saying, we deserve to be here, we're making a difference.
So how do you think the Chatham Colored All-Stars should be remembered today?
Well, I think that they should be remembered for the way that they stood up for themselves, the way that they moved into white sporting spaces, even though they paid a heavy price for that. I mean, that wasn't easy for them to do that, financially and psychologically. It was tough, but they did it. And they did it for the community. They gave back to the community, and they represented. They were role models for people that really needed to look to find people who would, sort of point a way for them, and who would be able to, show them that another way of living is possible.
So what impact do you hope your book will really have on readers' understanding of racial barriers in sport?
Well, one thing is I want them to realize that they were very real. I mean, I think it's in Canada, we sometimes like to think that, we didn't have those kind of racial barriers. Jackie Robinson came to Montreal and he was well received. Well, the story is a lot more complicated than that. And I think it's important we realize that, racism was here, it was on the ground, it was in sports. But at the same time, people resisted it. Black people got, banded together and said, we're going to do things even though people are telling us that we shouldn't. And I think that's really important.
Are there any other little-known stories of racial barrier breaking in sports that maybe you think should be told?
Well, yes, the women's, Black women's sports. There were Black women's softball teams in the same area in the same time period. 1920s, softball was very popular amongst young women, and so there were Black women's teams in in Chatham and in Buxton and in London, and we're only just sort of hearing those stories. They've been in the community. People, certainly within the Black communities, people have always known about these stories, but it's only now, more recently, that their stories are, becoming more well known. And that's I think a really important lead that should be followed.
Absolutely. Miriam Wright is the author of the book Sporting Justice, an associate professor of history at the University of Windsor. Thanks so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you.
Well, from alcohol and drug addictions to life's hurts and pains, the reality is most of us know someone, whether it's a friend, a coworker, a relative, or anyone who struggles with this. Some do find help through the medical system, some never find help at all, and others find a spiritual solution. Joining us from Lethbridge to discuss this is Patty Bidevat, ministry leader with Celebrate Recovery. Patty, welcome to Bridge City News. Great to have you on today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this.
Absolutely. Okay, so maybe give us a bit of an overview of what Celebrate Recovery is all about.
Well, Celebrate Recovery is about finding freedom from our hurts, hangups, and habits of any kind. Most of us in life have been hurt in some way or another. And some people think that this is just for people with addictions, but it really truly isn't. We've all had hurts or hurt somebody at some point. And so we get freedom through Christ, and this is long-lasting true freedom.
Okay, and you meet in Lethbridge, right? So where and when do you guys meet?
We meet on Friday evenings at 7 p.m. at the Park Meadows Baptist Church, and the last Friday of the month, though, we start at 6 o'clock because we have a pizza supper. And then it's a special Friday evening that it's a celebration. So Celebrate Recovery, we celebrate.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the church there. Now, are people who aren't involved in any church or even non-Christians welcome to attend as well?
Everyone is welcome to attend. We welcome with open arms anybody, and we are glad to see new faces, and it is growing. It is ministering to Christians or non-Christians, and it's a great program for absolutely everyone, men and women, anybody above the age of 18.
Wow. Okay. And so you say that the program, it's not just for people who are struggling with drug and alcohol, but for a wide variety of hurts, right? Or habits or hangups. How do you help those people? Maybe explain that a little bit.
Absolutely. It is for a wide variety of hurts, hangups, or habits. Some people have issues with codependency, or maybe there might be other addictions like shopping addiction or food addiction, or just simply been hurt and are struggling with maybe some anxiety or depression, and just need some support from a loving group of people that love God and love each other and just want to help one another in finding this true freedom. And this is it's a part of what God has brought into my life and many people's lives around the world. And so it's for absolutely anybody.
Yeah. And a lot of those hangups sound like things that many of us can relate to as well. I mean, we all get anxiety at sometimes, the shopping addiction, I can totally relate to that as well. And
Yes.
yeah, I'm sure you see it in various degrees to the point where people
Yes.
need help. So it's almost like a 12-step program though, right? Where kind of similar to Alcoholics Anonymous. So what would the key differences be?
Well, it is very similar to the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have not been involved with Alcoholics Anonymous, so I'm not familiar at all. But from what I've heard, and that's where it originated, John Baker from California was very involved. He's passed away last year, but he started at Alcoholics Anonymous, and then he was wanting to do something that was Christ-centered. And so he talked to the pastor of his church, Rick Warren, and that's where it all started. Rick Warren just said, okay, this is your ministry, go with it. And so it's biblical based. The 12 steps approach is from the Beatitudes, from the book of Matthew. And so it's very, set up the similar to Alcoholics Anonymous. We also have 8 principles. And so it's really set up well according to how God wants us to be able to truly find freedom, and not as the world sees it. But it's great.
Interesting. It's interesting that it was started by the same person who started Alcoholics Anonymous, or AA, as it's more commonly known. And it sounds almost like he wanted to kind of make it a little bit more spiritual. Like AA is spiritual. They talk about your higher power, but it sounds more like he really wanted to hone in on that sort of Christian angle. Is that kind of what I'm getting from that?
Yes, exactly. He went to church there at Saddleback in California, and there was no Christ-based program to help people with addictions, and he had an addiction, and so he was searching, and so then he wrote up this a paper to the pastor wanting to start a ministry. And Rick Warren just said, go with it. It's blessed by God. And it's in every country around the world. It's a huge ministry, and it is really, truly helping many, many people. And me personally, it has helped me as I have been hurt in my past. And so I came just, seeking help because I was struggling with some anxiety and depression. So,
Yeah. Okay. And I guess you turn around and now you're leading that group, right? That's
Yes.
amazing. So what kinds of things would take place in a typical meeting? Maybe walk us through that a little bit.
Right. So at the beginning of the meeting, we have 2 main parts, and then at the end we can just get together for coffee and snacks at the very end after 9 o'clock. But the first hour between 7 and 8 o'clock is a large group, and people come and we sing some worship songs, and we go through and say the either the 12 principles or the 8 steps, and we listen to either one week we listen to a lesson by Johnny Baker or somebody else. Sometimes it's online, but that's how that is taught. But every other week, then we do a testimony, and we are trying actually to once a month have a live testimony. So some of our leaders have written up their testimonies, and we'll share them in person, which is very powerful.
Wow.
And so that's great. But otherwise, we have testimonies that we have access to online. And so the large group will meet and listen to that. Then the men and the women between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock divide into separate groups, men and women. And then they are welcome to openly share something that touched them about the testimony, or what was important that they could glean from the lesson, and just digging deeper. And also then there's a time of prayer where we can pray for one another. So it's such a blessed evening, and it's such amazing people coming together to just support one another.
Are people required to share their own struggles at these meetings, or is it more of a like when you see fit, you can open up about it, you can sit there and just take it all in, you don't have to necessarily share?
Right. At the beginning, many of us are nervous to share, and so there is no requirement to share at all. Only when you are ready, you can share. And where God leads and how he leads. And yeah, at the beginning, a lot of people don't share, and that's okay. Come and listen, come and just be a part, build relationships, connect with other women or men, and just, yeah, over time,
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm
as the
just
heart leads.
curious when people are addicted to a substance or if they have a lot of that hurt that they're holding on to, how long does it take to recover from that? I know it would vary definitely from person to person, but is there kind of an average timeline that you're looking at?
Well, I'm not sure about an average timeline because a lot of people's addictions are different. We are not counselors or we don't do counselor referrals, but some people do come after they've been either in a treatment or sometimes they come before they've been in treatment and then they realize that maybe they should go for treatment. So it definitely varies. I don't know if there is a an average time line, but for every person, it all depends on how serious you are and how diligent you want to dig into your
Sure. Yeah,
healing
no, that makes
and
sense.
your journey.
Are there any particular keys to breaking an addiction?
Um, there is ultimately giving it to God. God really leads, and so that's a huge thing. Connecting with other people that attend and finding that support when you are struggling. We freely can share our cell phone numbers or communicate with people on Friday nights. After the Friday nights, um, the men have started something on a separate night called Step Studies, which digs deeper through some actual work and whatnot. And it's usually about a year long. The women are going to be starting shortly for these step studies. And so it's a separate day of the week. And you dig deeper, but you also connect more deeper on those during those step studies. So that's a separate other than Friday nights. And so that depending on how deep a person and how diligently a person is working on that will be how quickly and how soon you will find that some true freedom.
Sure. And of course, we are human beings, and obviously, people have relapses. So, what happens when a person relapses? What's the plan for that, and how often does that tend to happen?
You know, for every person, it's different, and a relapse can happen sometimes even at the beginning, one every other week or every week or whatever. Sometimes, whatever, like it can happen. And there is some of the lessons are geared to relapse. So there is one of the lessons called relapse. And it really helps us be aware that relapse is possible and if it does happen, what we can do. And what we can do is just keep going. Pick up your bootstraps, like don't um, stop your healing journey. And that's when we truly need to lean into our fellow celebrate recovery people, our and really just talk to them and just be open and honest. And there is no shame in coming back whatsoever. We are just glad that people will come back after relapse, and that we know they will, yeah, continue. And that's the blessing of seeing that where somebody has relapsed and they just keep
Sure.
then walking the journey.
Yeah, I mean, we often hear that sometimes our social circles can shape us. So, with that said, how important is it for someone who wants to break that cycle of addiction to form some new social networks, get some new friends? Is that almost key?
It is. It is very much key because when you've been very entrenched, maybe in a deep addiction, your social circles are people that are also commonly in addiction. and in that same addiction. And so therefore we really encourage people to connect and stay connected with friends that they meet at Celebrate Recovery, and communicate once a week or more often if needed, so that they can keep going, and yeah, they will probably see that they will connect more and more with their new friends. And that's what we encourage, and encourage, as they would like to maybe go to church, and meet people there. But yes, building new friendships.
Right. And then once again, just to remind our viewers, you meet at 7 p.m. on Fridays, right?
Yes,
In
we
Lethbridge,
meet.
anyways. Where is that?
Yes, we meet at 7 p.m. In Lethbridge at the Park Meadows Baptist Church. There is another church that is also supporting along the way and has other people involved that have come from that church, and that's Parallel, also in Lethbridge, which has been great. We've got some great support there too. So yes, it is at 7 p.m. at Park Meadows Baptist Church every Friday.
Okay, and I would imagine if somebody does not live in Lethbridge, our viewers in Ontario or wherever, they can check with their local churches to see who offers a Celebrate Recovery program.
Yes, they would be able to look online and be able to find a location near them.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Sounds great. It looks like we're out of time here, Patty, but thanks so much for being with us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for highlighting this awesome ministry, what God has done. He's just continuing.
Patty Bidevat is a ministry leader with Celebrate Recovery. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.